unbelievable that we would actually be this far along. We've worked a long time on replacing our aging bookmobile, but who would have thought that today we would be 2/3 of the way towards our goal. It's also amazing to believe that we have our best-selling authors and the former governor of Virginia here to partner in our efforts. So first of all, I'd like to thank Beth, Macy, Mark, and Clark, Governor Baliles, and for making this evening possible, and my special thanks to Ben Williams for being our moderator. I would also like to thank the businesses and individuals who generously agreed to be sponsors of this event. At the publisher level of $500, we have the Reynolds Homestead, Dr. Gregory Hutchins DDS, Jim McMillan Insurance, and Patrick County Farm Bureau. At the editor level of $250, we have the Patrick County Family Practice, American National Bank and Trust Company in Martinsville. At the author level of $100, we have the Blue Ridge Mountain Real Estate, Charlie and Mary Jo Lee, Christopher A. Corbett, Citizens Telephone Cooperative, Edward Jones Investment, Elizabeth's Pizza, and Norris Funeral Services. We want to thank you all for supporting this event and the Bookmobile Fund. We plan to recognize all of our sponsors and donors on our website and other appropriate ways in the coming weeks. Thank you one and all for your contributions to this project. Thank you for being here today. I would also like to thank the folks who have been working hard for many months on both the overall Bookmobile fundraising project and tonight's event. They include the Blue Ridge Regional Library Foundation Board members, the Blue Ridge Regional Library Board of Trustees, the members of the Friends of the Library, the library staff members and community volunteers, of whom there are many, and we thank each and every one of them. I would also like to make a special shout out to one person who helped really get this ball rolling. She was unable to be here tonight. Her name is Diane Atkins. She's a retired director of the Pennsylvania County Public Library System. And back in spring of 2016, Cecil Holland, the Bookmobile driver at that time, had reached out to Diane because 10 years ago they had bought a Bookmobile, and we were hoping to get a little advice, and she wanted to see a copy of the grant application because in the library world we always practice R&D, which stands for rip off and duplicate. And so, why reinvent the wheel? But anyway, Cecil had asked her for the application. She said, sure. And she said, well, I could help you because I just retired. I said, we'll give you, I'll be glad to help you out. Well, she started meeting with Cecil and Gary Clifton, our branch manager, and then I thought about it and I got involved. And then the Friends of the Library decided to get involved. And then the Board of Trustees decided to get involved. Then the Foundation Board got involved. And then we got Patrick County Board of Supervisors who gave us a very nice pledge. They got involved. And then individuals, businesses, civic clubs, organizations, the elementary schools raised funds for the Bookmobile. The Mediterranean community came together and had a fundraiser for us. And it's just amazing how many people have gotten involved in this project. And it's all because one person said, I want to help. And it's just amazing, the outpouring, the support, and the enthusiasm. And ladies and gentlemen, we are going to reach our goal. We're going to get a new Bookmobile. And we're going to keep reading rolling in Patrick County. To begin tonight's program, I would like to call upon one of Patrick County's most recognized and admired native sons, who has become a major supporter of the Bookmobile, and a mentor as well. Gerald L was born and grew up in Patrick County. He attended Woolwine Elementary School and went on to graduate from the Fishburne Military School in Waynesboro. He earned a BA at Wesleyan University in Cincinnati, and then graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law. He began his public service career with his election to the House of Delegates, where he served from 1976 to 1982. Gerald L served as the Attorney General of Virginia from 1982 through 1985, and in January of 1986, he took the oath of office as the 65th Governor of Virginia. As Governor, he oversaw significant improvements to the state's transportation infrastructure, economic development, and education systems. After leaving office, he returned to private law practice, specializing in aviation and international law. Governor Baliles continues to champion education. He founded and is the chairman of the Patrick County Education Foundation, whose programs have helped hundreds of Patrick County students and adult learners obtain GEDs, workforce training, and assistance to attend college. From 2006 to 2014, he was the director of the Miller Center, a nonpartisan affiliate of the University of Virginia that specializes in presidential scholarship, public policy, and political history. Although nominally retired, Jerry Baliles remains busy with service on the boards of a number of corporations, foundations, civic and nonprofit organizations, including the National Geographic Foundation and the Public Broadcasting Service, where he is the chairman of the board. He and his wife Robin enjoy spending part of the time at the Baliles family home here in Patrick County, and they are gracious enough to join us tonight. It is my great honor to ask Governor Gerald L. to speak to us this evening.
Thank you, Rick. Ladies and gentlemen, special guests, good evening. I want to thank Rick and all of you for your presence tonight, and for your support of the county's Knowledge on Wheels, the Bookmobile. It's good to be back home in Patrick at the Reynolds Homestead, and I know that everyone is looking forward to seeing and hearing Beth, Macy, and Martin Clark, and learning more about their work and the stories they tell. But before our writers come on stage, I have a story to tell you as well. As you know, I grew up in this county. I lived just far enough away from Stewart that going to the library was not easy or frequent. But I was lucky enough to live on the Bookmobile route. And every 2 weeks or so, especially during summer vacation, the Bookmobile would stop across the road from my grandfather's farmhouse, and I would escape from farm chores to visit the Bookmobile. I would pick up so many inviting books, so many interesting books, that I would enlist my brother Larry and a neighborhood friend to check out some books in their names, since there was a limit on how many books a borrower we could take out. And I read with great relish books about history, geography, biographies of American presidents, and followed the adventures of explorers, aviators, and inventors from all over the world. I still remember some of those books, and I certainly remember the librarian, Miss Lady Clark. She believed in reading and in providing books to everyone, and she wasn't afraid to let a young person tackle a difficult book, perhaps one considered above his or her level, and she encouraged me to read widely. It was the Bookmobile, Miss Lady Clark, and my Wilmine elementary school teachers who helped awaken my curiosity about the world beyond Patrick County. Reading gave me a solid foundation, and it also stirred my imagination. And from this fortunate beginning, I was able to work my way through college, law school, and then went into law and a career of public service, and later worked as a strategic legal counsel on international aviation and trade matters, as well as later in higher education and public policy issues. I've been lucky enough to realize many of my dreams, two in particular: visiting and working in places around the world that I read about as a child, Patrick County. And of course, the honor of serving our Commonwealth as its 65th governor. I still love to read at home, in libraries, bookstores, newspapers, airplanes, and for me, it all started with the Patrick County Bookmobile. I still enjoy visiting the Patrick County Library, and when I'm back home in the county, especially so. Last winter, I got an email from Gary Clifford, sent him a letter and a donation. And the next time I visited the library, I learned more about the need for a new vehicle and the fundraising effort that the library system and the Library Foundation had launched. Here's what I learned from Janet Demeray, then chair of the Regional Library Board, and Gary Clifton, the local manager. One, the county library bookmobile program has been in operation for more than 70 years and travels to every part of the county, taking books and library resources to elementary school students, parents, and senior citizens. Two, the bookmobile last year received over 9,000 patron visits and now accounts for over 1/3 of the total circulation of the county library each year. That's impressive. Three, I was advised that when the 19-year-old bookmobile is in the shop for repairs, sometimes for weeks or months, waiting for parts, the county citizens, especially the children, are without the opportunity to continue reading interest in their projects. So it's no wonder the library's bookmobile is so highly regarded by the communities it serves. And when one looks at the geography of Patrick and the roads and distances that the bookmobile must travel from Stewart each week to the communities of Ararat, Christ, Medicine Dan, Woolwine, and the Fairstone Park area, it should come as no surprise to learn that the 19-year-old creaky bookmobile, as my grandfather might have said, just worn plumb out. After learning about the need for a new bookmobile and the fundraising effort that was going on, I thought perhaps I could be of assistance and offer to help. 6 months later, I'm still working with the library and the Library Foundation Board and the wonderful community volunteers who are leading the effort to raise the funds needed to replace the 19-year-old vehicle. And the next time that creaky bookmobile has a breakdown, it may not be possible to put it back on the road safely. So ladies and gentlemen, the time is here. In fact, it is past time to purchase a new vehicle. In researching a new bookmobile, the library system found that a new vehicle, similar to the one now in use, will cost around $185,000. In a rural county like Patrick, with a limited tax base, it is simply not possible to count on funding from the local government alone for such a big ticket item, especially in light of the county's regular funding of the library. And for example, the total budget allocation of Patrick County to the Blue Ridge Regional System for this year's fiscal operations of the local library is around $267,000. So the regional library trustees and director asked the county's board of supervisors for partial funding of the bookmobile, which was generously given and gratefully received. And everyone concurred that it would be necessary to raise the rest of the money from foundation and government grants, donations from individuals, businesses, and organizations, and by digging into the library system's unlimited reserves. The good news is that much progress has been made, but not quite enough. Last year, in November 2016, the Bookmobile Fund, built up from donations and book sales over a number of years, stood at $26,000. As of last week, the fund had reached a total of almost $125,000, on the way to that goal of $185,000. Many of you present this evening, along with your friends and neighbors, your civic organizations and businesses, have contributed to the Bookmobile Fund. As you heard Rick say, children in county elementary schools have conducted fundraising projects. There have been community yard sales and online auctions to benefit the fund. The Library Foundation and the library system are still pursuing two substantial grants, one from the Richard S. Reynolds Foundation and the other one from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Friends of the Library continue to help by allocating the proceeds of 2 book sales per year to the Bookmobile, and other groups and individuals are donating as word continues to spread about this project around the county and beyond its borders. Everyone who is working on this project, including our sponsors, guest authors, and everyone who has donated to the fund, has the same conviction, which I wholeheartedly share, that the 71-year service of a library bookmobile should not perish from Patton County. Today's young people and those of tomorrow must have the same opportunities to discover the world and to enrich their lives through reading and learning, just as we did. Now, when you entered the room this evening, you were given an envelope with a card inside. The pledge card is a reminder and an appeal. Please consider investing in the future and donating to the Bookmobile Fund. If you cannot do so this evening, take the envelope home and send your check at your earliest convenience. And if you wish to discuss a substantial donation, $2 million, for example, either in this tax year or in 2018, just send your card with your contact information, and I guarantee you someone will be in touch with you. The Blue Ridge Regional Library Foundation is a 501c3 charitable organization under current federal tax law, and there could be significant benefits to the donors, especially if you give $1 million or more. So as you leave this room, there will be someone near the door to collect your pledges or donations that you would like to make tonight. One final observation. At a time when many rural communities and small towns are going through hard economic times, and when it seems that our social fabric is badly frayed, efforts like the Bookmobile Fund, which brings people together to work for the common good, are vital to the health of our communities. The end goal is worthy, but the process itself is important too. And the more people, organizations, and businesses that we can involve in this effort, the quicker we can reach our goal. And the sooner that readers of all ages in all parts of Patton County will know that they can count on the Bookmobile's regular visits for many years to come. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your support of books, for reading, and for being here tonight to support this vital community service, and especially the one who wishes to grant the Library Foundation that $1 million. Thank you.
All right, this is the moment you've been waiting for. Tonight we have the rare opportunity to listen to 2 celebrated writers who tell the stories of our region to the world. Beth Macy has spent more than half her life in the Roanoke area and has been telling stories of this area of the country as an award-winning journalist at the Roanoke Times and as the author of the acclaimed books Factory Man and True Vine. Beth grew up in Urbana, Ohio, and was the first in her family to attend college. She graduated from Bowling Green State University with a major in journalism and got her first reporting job in Columbus, Ohio, reporting on local government and schools for a group of suburban weeklies. Her first book, Factory Man, was named a New York Times Notable Book of 2014 and appeared on many other best-selling Best Books of the Year lists, including including those of the Christian Science Monitor and Publishers Weekly. It won the Library of Virginia's People's Choice Award for nonfiction in 2015. Wow. And Beth's second book, True Vine, was chosen as one of 2016's top 10 books by New York Times reviewer Janet Mason and by the San Francisco Chronicle, and was named a New York Times Notable Book of 2016. Beth's writing has won more than a dozen National Journalism Awards, including the Nieman Fellowship for Journalism at Harvard and the 2013 J. Anthony Lucas Word in Progress Award for Factory Man, how one furniture maker battled offshoring, stayed local, and helped save an American town in July of 2014. She lives in Roanoke with her husband Tom, her sons, and her rescue mutts, Mavis and Charlie. Entertainment Weekly called Martin Clark hands down our finest legal thriller writer. The New York Times stated that he is the thinking man's John Grisham. The Winston-Salem Journal declared that he has set the new standard by which other works of legal fiction should be judged. And David Baldacci praised him as a truly original writer. Currently a sitting circuit court judge in Paddock County, Martin is a cum laude Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Davidson College and attended law school at the University of Virginia. When he was appointed to the bench in 1992 at the age 32, he became one of the youngest judges in the history of the Commonwealth. His novels have appeared on several bestseller lists, and The Jezebel Remedy was a #1 American literature and fiction bestseller on Amazon. Additionally, his novels have been chosen as a New York Times notable book, a Washington Post Book World Best Book of the Year, a Bookmarks Magazine Best Book of the Year, a Boston Globe Best Book of the Year, a Book of the Month Club selection, a finalist for the Stephen Crane First Fiction Award, and the winner of the Library of Virginia's People Choice Award in 2009 and 2016. Double wow. He is a former trustee of Stewart Presbyterian Church, a lifelong fly fishing enthusiast, and was honored with the Paddock County Outstanding Community Service Award in 2016. Mark's wife Dina is a photographer, and they live on a farm with dogs, cats, chickens, guinea fowl, and 3 donkeys. Our moderator tonight is Ben Williams. Ben R. Williams is a writer and journalist hailing from Bassett, Virginia. In addition to writing for the Martinsville Bulletin, he has had 2 plays produced as a regular fixture at the Millmount Theater's Overnight Sensations 24-hour play event, has participated 11 years in a row in the International 3-Day Novel Writing Contest, and regularly performs readings and stand-up comedy in the Roanoke area. He is a 2007 graduate of Roanoke College, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Ben and let him introduce you to our authors. If you all would like to come to the stage. Let's give them a
Oh, wait, that works for me.
Do you have a mic?
Oh, actually, I'm doing this mic, I think.
I'm going to get it started.
Well, thank you very much to Rick Ward for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to Governor Baliles for that fantastic opening speech. I'd just like to briefly say before we begin that some months ago, I learned that the Library Foundation was seeking a moderator for this event. They wanted a figure who was deeply respected in the community, someone beloved by all, and someone who inspired people wherever he went. Now, of course, Governor Baliles chose to do the introduction instead. But after that, Gary Clifton found me catching snapping turtles out at Philpott and asked if I'd do it. But in seriousness, it is an honor to be sharing the dais with these 2 phenomenally talented writers. And let's get down to brass tacks, I suppose. So we're all here tonight because of the Bookmobile, which provides books to people in the most far-flung areas of the county, and most importantly provides books to young people and fosters in them a lifelong love of reading. So with that in mind, my first question for our authors is this. When you were children, what was the first book you remember reading that made you fall in love with books and maybe even inspired you to become an author? Whoever would like to begin first. Go ahead.
Well, thank you for having us, first of all. And I just want to say what an honor it is to be here with Ben and also with Martin, who I just fought people over to get, when I was at the Roanoke Times, to get to write the story about Martin Clark. So I'm just so excited that we're to be sharing stage with him. And I love his work. And Ben has been great. The book that really lit me up about reading. My fourth grade teacher turned me on to it. It was called Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh. And it's about a girl that probably didn't have that much in common with me. She was I think from the Upper East Side in New York, but she's kind of an outsider and a big observer of life, and she was quite snoopy. And she gave me this idea that it was okay to kind of sit on the sides, and that's kind of what I've always done. And this idea of having your own voice. And when I was reading that book as a kid in my little town that I grew up in Ohio, we had this stand of lilac bushes that was like a half block long, and there was a little trail in the middle of them. And I would sit in the middle of the bushes and sort of watch people do things, and they didn't know I was there. So I always think of that.
I don't remember. My goodness. I feel I'm in the fourth. I'm good now. Okay. I don't remember reading much until I was in the fourth grade, and I don't know if anyone recalls that, but in the elementary schools here, there was a small booklet or a sheet that was passed around. I was in Audrey Davis's class, I recall, and you could order books, and they were geared for younger people. And I ordered almost exclusively sports books. I had no interest in literature or writing. I wanted to be an athlete. And you could get books on Willie Mays, you could get books on Hank Aaron, Jim Thorpe, and that sort of hooked me on reading. I soon discovered, I later found out, I went to my friend Tom Burnett's house, and we discovered Instant Replay, the Jerry Kramer book. And I don't know how many of you have ever seen the Steve Harvey piece in Kings of Comedy, but he said all the kids in church were absolutely thrilled when they learned that Sister Odell cursed. And I went over to the Burnett's house, and here's this book, and we're in the 6th or 7th grade, and it's full of profanity. And we thought, and all kinds of locker room hijinks, and we thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And I remember for some reason, Tom and Eddie and I sat there, and we underlined every bit of profanity in Instant Replay and counted it up. And then we graduated to Dan Jenkins and Semi-Tough. And so I would suppose, I started in the 4th grade with sports books, and I wanted to be an athlete. It never really happened for me. So
I think it worked out all right.
Yeah.
So, my next question for the both of you is that all writers, and especially successful writers, have had to face rejection. So I'm curious, in the early days of your careers, how many rejection letters did you receive? And do you have any favorite stories of rejection or painful cuts from an editor or publisher?
All of the above. I once got when I was trying to freelance, the kids were little and I had quit my job for a few years. I was working out of our basement and teaching classes a couple nights a week. And I would send off these, what I thought were kind of humorous essays. And a Washington Post editor wrote me back and he said, "Funny thing about humor, it's got to make me laugh." Yeah, so I remember every word of that. But I don't remember the nice things as well as I remember the rejections. It took me, I had written 2 book proposals before I sold the proposal for Factory Man. And I just keep telling young writers to it took me 2 tries to get the Nieman Fellowship at Harvard. I just keep throwing things up on the wall and see what sticks. And I think that's what you have to do in the gig economy, as they call it. And your skin gets tougher.
And before I answer that, let me think. I have every reason in the world to be here. It's my county. I have a direct and indirect interest in our library. Janet Demaray was my neighbor when I was a lad. Rick Ward's been my friend forever, and I think the world of Patrick County. And Beth is a big deal, and she has no reason to be here other than she really doesn't. And I know when True Vine came out, I was flipping through television, and I guess you're in Tennessee. I mean, you're on C-SPAN, you're on Book TV, you're on NPR, just everywhere. And now she's and I'm not. I know this is going to get under your skin. And now she's rubbing shoulders with Tom Hanks. What's he like? Yeah, with Tom Hanks and Leonardo DiCaprio. So thank you for coming and thanks for helping us out. It's really great to have you. We appreciate you being here. And thank you for that question, Donna Brazil.
Oh.
That's as political as I'll get. But I've got some rejection letters, and interestingly enough, and in fairness to Ben, and he knows this, and I knew he was going to ask that question, I have always carried them with me. I always vowed when I was getting them and getting rejection letters for 20 years that if I ever got published, I would keep them with me and I would read them at events. So, interestingly enough, I have a couple tonight. It's like all the local musicians, and they say, you say, "You guys want to play?" And they're like, "Oh, no, I couldn't do it. Well, you sure you don't want to? Well, I got the guitar out in the car. Let me go to the truck. Let me go ahead and get it." This is from, I think...
Oh, that one lady?
Oh, yeah. You see this?
She kept turning up in your...
Yeah. This lady's name is Ruth Cantor, literary agent, 5th Avenue, New York. This is so old, it is written on a manual typewriter. And it has...
83.
Yeah, 83. January 24, 1983. And it has whiteout on it. Dear Martin Clark, you seem to have proved that you can write wittily and amusingly about just anything and everything that enters your head. What you have not, and she took the effort in the old days to underscore that. That's not easy.
That was good to go back.
Yeah, you got to go back and work on that. What you have not proved is that you can write a novel. I read 5 pages and wondered if you'd ever been scared by a performing flea, read 10 more and developed a severe case of vertigo, spot checked through the balance of the manuscript and could discover no improvement. So I have no choice but to pass on this. Geez, I thought you were going to sign me up. People just won't put up with this sort of writing anymore, and editors know it. And my other treasure, and many people in here have heard this, and there are probably a couple of people who haven't. And the short version of this story is, when I lived in Charlottesville, I took my manuscript out and I put it in Rita Mae Brown's mailbox. And I asked her to help me. And she wrote me a letter back, and this is the final paragraph. As to mixing law and literature, it would seem to me you'll either be a half-ass writer or a half-ass lawyer. Literature is a full-time passion. Sincerely, Rita Mae Brown. I have a few rejections. And they didn't inspire me, they just made me sad. People say, it was fuel for the fire and it made me really want to, you see these people, I was drafted in the 9th round and it just inspired me and motivated me to do, it just made me sad.
Despair.
It just made me sad.
Caught some secondhand sorrow off those. That was rough. So, well, moving on to the happier conclusion to that side of it. It's exciting for any author to have their work published, but I imagine that becoming a New York Times bestselling author is another kettle of fish entirely. So, for both of you, how did you find out you become a New York Times bestselling author? How did you feel, and how did you celebrate?
Well, I'll talk about when I was waiting to get that first review, and I knew it was going to drop on a Friday. And I was just pacing, and I knew Janet Maslin wrote it, and she can be really scary. And I said, I gotta get out of the house. Let's go to the movies. We went to the Grandin Theater, which is down the street from our house. And then I kept going to the bathroom and hitting refresh on my phone. And then even at the end of the movie, it still hadn't dropped. It was like 5 o'clock. And then we went and we sat at the bar at Local Roots at the end of the bar, which is kind of our seat. It's actually where my picture was taken at that bar. And then it came down, and that was really exciting. And a week later, when I found out it was on the bestseller list, we were at the same bar. So it's special.
I found out maybe a week or so in advance because my review in 2000 was in the Sunday Book Review. And somehow they seem to know, at least at your publishers, maybe a week. I think they get and this was in 2000. And so it's a hard copy, and they seem to get it in advance. So Gabrielle, my publicist, called and said, the review's out, it's good, and it's going to be a notable book. And it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, especially in 2000, because the New York Times was and is so influential and has such a big readership that once you do that, once it shows up, then enough people are going to buy it that the next week you're going to be on the bestseller list. Now, here's the difference between me and Beth. Beth was in the top 10. Martin was in the top 100. You can honestly say it. But Beth was in. When you open that thing up and it says the top 10 books in the country, you see Beth Macy.
Only I'm one of the reviewers. Wasn't the whole thing.
And you got to find me. You got to go online and look. There he is, number 97 on the list.
I've got one question. This isn't on the list, but I'm curious.
No.
This is spontaneity.
You did
right?
say you could do that.
Yeah, I got permission. So how did y'all meet each other? I'm curious. I know y'all are friends. How did y'all first meet up?
So I was a feature writer at the Roanoke Times, and I think Madeline did a story about
Yeah,
when your
yeah,
first
Madeline
book came
Roosevelt.
out, and then she was on a book. She was on a leave or something, and then his second book was coming out. And I was just so smitten by the story. You all might remember the story. He wanted his first book to be published so badly that he told God if the editor would publish it, then he would give all of the advance and the royalties.
Yeah, every bit.
To the church. and then he did it because he's Martin. And then so I got to interview him at his horse farm, and I got to I watched you in court one day, and then we went to what's the diner in Stewart called?
Coffee break.
Coffee break. And I mean, that's hilarious. Everybody in there knows him. And then my husband did a story for public television a couple weeks later. He would kind of copy my stories, if I don't mind saying it. But I was so mad because he got the great detail that they keep a jar of Duke's Light behind the counter at the coffee break for Martin. I was really mad because I was like, I love that detail. And then all I remember about that story, I meant to reread it before it came, was that the kicker, that's what we call the ending, was in this book, Martin's going to tithe 10% to the church, and he's keeping the rest.
Most folks here know Bucky Huntsicker, who is my friend and was my minister then. And so when the second book sold, I went to Bucky and I asked him about what I should do, and I said, I'm a lawyer. I'm one step away from a Pharisee, and I said, I just promised the first book, Bucky. And we're Presbyterians. He said, that's cool. Just give a normal time. I said, well, I have another question. I said, what about movie rights for the first book? I said, the book. I didn't say. He said, we're Presbyterians. You can keep that. And when Factory Man came out, I think I was one of your first readers.
You were. You very kindly gave me a blurb, and you sent this great kind of get ready.
Yeah. And I read Factory Man, and I hope everyone here has read it. And if you hadn't, you should. It's a remarkable book, and the reason it is so good, I don't read any nonfiction. I don't read any nonfiction at all. And I read this book, and it reads like fiction. It reads like Faulkner. It is an amazing, amazing book. And I read it in a couple of days, and sent a blurb in.
Oh, it meant so much.
And then I find out why Beth really wanted me to read it. So she said, did you read the book? And I said, I did. And she says, Do you think there are any problems with defamation in here? You know that? Yeah. I said, yeah, the guy's dead. You're okay.
That's what the lawyers want to know. Is that person alive?
Hey, Dad,
No,
you're good to go. You're good to go. But it's a phenomenal book, and I was tickled to read it. Thank you.
We'll move back to the security of the list here. So, yeah, I know that y'all have both traveled extensively on book tours and done many speaking engagements like this one. And along the way, have you gotten to meet any of your literary heroes? Have you been starstruck? And are there any favorite stories from the road?
This isn't a story for the road, but this is one of my literary heroes when I used to write a column for the Roanoke Times, and I taught essay writing like as an adjunct professor at Hollins one night a week. And I always taught my favorite columnist, who was Anna Quinlan. And a couple months before Factory Man came out, she gave a lecture at Hollins University. And I was invited to be in this small group of women who got to meet her in this. I didn't know how many people were going to be there. And it was at the library. And literally, you got in there, and it was like me and 5 people. It was crickets. And as I was leaving the door, we had the galleys, which are the practice copies that go out to reviewers and Factory Man. And of course, I wanted to give her one, but I didn't want to be that guy, you know. So I switched purses. I had my big purse, and I stuck Factory Man, the galley, in the purse. And my husband said, "It's okay if you don't give it to her, don't worry." And then, so I got in there, and she was just so nice. And she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I just finished a book." And you could see, like, she's going to give me the book. She's going to give me the book. And she said, "Who's the publisher?" And I said, "It's Little Brown." And she lit up. And she, "Oh, and what's it about?" And I told her it's about this. And she, you know, it's a Family Feud story, but it's also a business story. And it's timely. And she goes, "Well, I'd love to read it." I go, "When?" So, and we're still in touch. I mean, we were emailing this week, and she gives me advice, and she doesn't do blurbs, unlike Martin, but she tells me she talks it up. So that can't hurt. Yeah. So I was just like tell students that story too, because sometimes you just have to put yourself out there. I had just been at this on this panel at Penn State with Dean Baquet, who was the editor of the New York Times, and I was actually with them 2 days. It was just he and I. We were the speakers in this thing, and I was so intimidated. I didn't even give him my card. And John Bassett called on the way back, and he said, "Well, how'd it go?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I was just in a rare moment, like you never let your guard down with John Bassett, but in a rare moment, I told him it hadn't gone well." And he said, "Listen, you're used to people kissing your ass. It's time for you to kiss ass. You gotta stand it." So always be self.
Have you ever done any gigs and nobody comes?
Oh yeah, bookstores.
Yeah.
The bookstore employees.
Yeah. I won, but I only got one, and I felt so bad in Lexington, Kentucky. And I showed up, and I'd been in Miami the night before, and it was a big bookstore, it was a powerhouse bookstore, Joseph Beth, and they have a huge following, they have a huge newsletter, and you do the little morning show the day before, so I'm in Miami, and I'm on the radio there, and in Kentucky, and I show up, and there's no one there. No one. Stack of books and Martin, and no one came. And it's like Wednesday night or Tuesday night, and finally the lady looks at me. She said, "Well, probably everybody's at church." I said, "Man, it's Tuesday night."
Sometimes it's just people you know. Like they've already heard it. I know.
That's
It's
even
a
worse.
sympathy visit.
My literary hero, and Ben knows this, is Larry Brown, not the basketball coach. And not the former running back, but Larry Brown from Oxford, Mississippi. And I got to meet Larry at the Eudora Welty Festival. I got to sit beside him. I changed the place cards around. And the irony of that is the card that I moved, and we are friends, but the card I moved so I could sit beside Larry was Liz Strout. That name may ring a bell. I guess she won the Pulitzer, 2 years ago? You sit over there. I'm going to sit next to Larry, and I love Larry. And Larry had a drinking problem, and Larry was drinking that night. He was the headliner. Liz, Haven, Kendall, and I were the opening acts. Larry showed up drunk, and it was this kind of arrangement. And we all went up on stage. It was Eudora Welty Festival, and I had prepared remarks. I did my best. Liz did a good job. Haven did a good job. Larry shows up. He sits in this big chair. He never stands up, and he said, my friend Rick Bass knew Eudora Welty. And one day, he went over to her house and mowed her yard. And she came out and she said, who are you? And he said, I'm Rick Bass. And that was it. That was about probably $2,500 of Larry Brown. And Mary Hannah helped him off the stage. And I saw him leaving, and he was loading up his pocket with aftershave that was from the goodie bag. And I said, don't drink it on the way home, brother. Just don't. Yeah, so that was my hero, and I got to meet him. I'm sure he doesn't remember.
So, this is a question for you, Beth. So, as a nonfiction writer, I am curious what sort of reactions you've received from the people you have written about after your books have been published. Have people been pleased with their portrayals in Factory Man and True Vine, and has anyone been less than pleased?
Yes. So, do y'all know Coy Young? He's the Bassett barber. Yes. So he's a great... Is Coy here? No. He's the Bassett barber, and he gave me a lot of material for the book, almost all of which I used, and that he was kind of worried about, because he knew had gone pretty deep with some of the family stories. And he said, Beth, do you have, and this was right before the book came out, he said, do you have a gun? I said, no, I've never even touched a gun, and I'm afraid of them. And I think you should get a gun. And then he said, well, sometimes when I go into another state and I can't do open carry, I carry wasp and hornet spray. So he said, why don't you get you a can of wasp and hornet spray for when you come back to Bassett? And he actually had me really worried. But the people in Bassett could not have been nicer. There were a few that were upset with the book, and I understand it, and I tried to hear them out. And but overall, the people whose stories I felt hadn't been told and who deserved to have the last word, I think they were pleased to finally have their voice out there. And that meant a lot to me. In True Vine, the main character who's alive in True Vine is the niece of George and Willie Muse. And she is the one... she was the gatekeeper of the story, and I asked if I could first do the story 25 years ago. And she makes John Bassett look like a pussycat. She pointed to a sign the first time I went into her soul food restaurant and asked to do a story about her famous great uncles. She pointed to a sign on the wall that a customer made her that said, sit down and shut up. They're resting, they're retired, they've been exploited their whole lives. And so, reluctantly, she lets me do the book, literally 25 years later, and she never said she liked the book. She read an early copy, she caught a few things I had wrong, and handed it back, and then at the book launch party, the guy who made the sit down and shut up sign brought the stencil that he had used to make the sign, and I was like, oh, Nancy, do you still have the sign? Because I really want the sign, but I didn't want to ask for the sign. And she finally said, you can have this sign after you deliver my eulogy. So that was the nicest thing she's ever said, and I'll take it because that was pretty darn nice. But so all I really cared about was that she was happy with the book. I mean, I knew there were some hard things for her to read, but she knew, she thought I had been fair. And overall, the response to both of them overall has been good. But I mean, it's tough when you spend a lot of time with somebody and you really bend over backwards to be fair, and they don't perceive the book the way you perceive it. The first time John Bassett read an early copy of Factory Man for fact-checking purposes only. That was a day. That was really a day. We had a real come to Jesus, and we don't talk about that day. But 3 days later, he asked if I would speak at his funeral and sent me flowers and apologized. So now I've got a lot of funeral gigs.
Yeah.
I got to be healthy.
The theme emerges here. Well, Mark, I've got a similar question for you. So, although you're a fiction writer, you do include real folks from the community in your books, such as Sheriff Lane Perry and Judge Cliff the Hammer of God Weckstein, to name just a couple. Now, when you include a real person in one of your books, do you reach out to them first to get their permission, and how have they reacted to their portrayals?
Anyone who's mentioned in my book, I'm always kind to, with one exception, and that one exception is buried pretty deeply. Susan Gascarini saw me after she read the book and popped it right out, and she knew that. But most people I mention, it's very kind. Senator Reynolds is mentioned in one of my books, and sometimes they're just cameos. Excuse me, the new book has a character, and the character's name is Melvin Harrell, and he lives in Mazatlan, and he has an airplane and an airstrip, and he's very wealthy. And I've never called anyone or reached out to anyone, but if anyone here knows Melvin Stanley, they'll understand why I sent him an email and said, "Melvin, you okay with this?" And he didn't write back for a couple of days, and you'd have to know him. And so he finally wrote back and said, "Oh yeah, it's okay if you portray me like that, because everyone will clearly know that it's based on him." He's the only person I've ever contacted beforehand. Because generally it's very nice. And some of the folks who show up over and over again are just good luck charms. Bucky Hunsicker's a good luck charm. Cliff Weckstein's a good luck charm. So they appear in every book, and they'll be in this one somehow. But I don't ask them up front.
Interesting. So, getting down to the brass tacks of actually writing, you often hear that the most important tool any writer can have is discipline. So, for both of you, how do you write? Do you set aside specific blocks of time each day, or do you have a specific place that you go to write?
I just write every morning. I get up at 6, write for an hour. It's that simple. Tom Wolfe told me years ago that if I was talking about writing a novel, and I said it seems daunting and it seems hard. He said, think about it like this. If you write a page a day for a year, you'll have written a novel. And it's not quite that simple, not quite that formulaic, but that's pretty much it. So I get up every day and write for about an hour and enjoy doing it about 6 to 7. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, but I try to do it every day.
How many words do you get typically?
I try to do a page over how many that would be. You know, a computer, what is that, 300 pages, 250, something like that. Yeah, that's... Yeah.
And I think because I'm a newspaper person for so many years, I just sit down. My husband calls it ass in chair. That's my big trick. I really just have to sit down every day and work. Sometimes I go away to these writing colonies. I've been to one in New Hampshire, a BCCA over by Sweetbriar. I recently did one in Rivendell, Tennessee. And those are great kind of getaways, but I like to just work in my home office, which is a spare bedroom that we've turned into a nice little office. And my husband works down the other hall, and he works at home too, and we meet for lunch. And he edits my stuff. He's my best editor and idea guy, and it's great. And then I try to exercise at the end of the day. But it's pretty much my job now to write these books. And the thing about it with nonfiction, and I don't know if it works the same way with fiction, but with nonfiction, you write a proposal, and you try to make it just like the most riveting thing ever. And I'll spend months on a proposal. My agent will send it back and forth. He actually has this proposal doctor who got a cut from Factory Man, actually. He gets 1.5% of anything I ever make on Factory Man, because he
Helps you with the pitch.
Yeah, he helps me with
I didn't
the
know
pitch.
this.
And then you get what's called an advance, which is broken up into 2 or 3 or 4 payments depending on what your contract is. And that's the money they pay you, so you have time to leave your job or whatever, like they pay you while you're working on it. And so I never take a day off because I'm spending that advance, It's not like, that's real motivating to me.
Yeah.
That if I mess up or I don't finish it, I'm going to have to give the money back, which I've been living on.
That would light a fire, certainly. Here's a two-parter for both of you. What is your favorite thing you've ever written, and what is your favorite thing you've ever written that you had to cut? I appreciate that odd moment.
My favorite thing I've ever written is my second book, which sold 20 or 25,000 copies fewer than my other books. And my favorite thing I've ever written that got cut, it got cut by my agent, and I put it back in, and then I sent it to Gary Fiskajohn, my editor. And Gary is legendary. I am sort of Gary's only chump author. He has 3 Pulitzer winners: Cormac McCarthy, Richard Ford, and Richard Russo. And so when I sent the manuscript in, it came back to me with his corrections. And I called and I said, "There's a page missing." And his assistant said, "Yeah, Gary just threw it away." It's so bad. It was Evers Wheeling and a lady he met in New York in the back of a limo in Manhattan. And it never got even close to being published. But I really liked it. It was so bad it didn't get edited. It truly was just balled up and thrown away. And by the way, that's the book. I wrote Jerry back in those days in 99 or 2000. Because it's very hard when you get started. You need to get blurbs. You need to people to boost your book. And I sent him the manuscript, and he was in Richmond in his castle at Hunt and his whole wing at Hunt and Williams. And so he called me on the phone, and he said, "Martin, I just read this book. Do you plan on being a judge much longer?" You remember that? That's a true story. And I said, "Jerry, I never really wanted to be a judge, but I wanted to be a published writer for 20 years. I'm going to roll the dice on it." And he wrote the funniest blurb ever, and it basically said, "Don't much like the language. It's an okay book, but I like Martin a lot. Please buy it." And we used it. Jerry was so influential, and before you heard the term brand, he was a brand. I mean, at the time, I remember we were talking, he didn't have clients, he represented countries. It was like Belgium or something, and something about airports. and so it really was helpful. I'm kind of lukewarm about this, but help Martin out. We sold a lot of books. We actually used it, and we put it out. So thanks, 17 years later, thank you.
Probably my favorite thing I ever wrote was the epilogue of Factory Man, which wasn't in the first draft. My editor said, when I sold the book, this pitch that I'd worked so hard on, I thought it would end with this powerful scene that I personally had witnessed. Much of the book was scenes I was recreating from interviews, had happened before I even knew who John Bassett was. But I actually was there at the moment where he announced with great fanfare that he was opening the vacant factory next door because he had won his case in Washington and was pumping the money back into his factory. And it was a great kind of heroic moment, but it was also mixed because so many of the other factories had closed. And so I thought the book would end there. My editor says it feels like it needs another beat. And I had this idea that I had written so much about the Smith River and the history that I want to go kayaking along it. And so Jim Franklin, who's a great Bassett guy, took me down the Smith River, and that made just kind of for a nice journey story at the end. And then I felt it was right that the people of Bassett got the last word in the book. And so that occurred to me as I was driving back from the town one day, and I thought of a quote that a woman had told me earlier, which is she had been a Toltecs worker, and she said she had run into her former CEO at a party she was catering because she had cobbled together all these part-time jobs. And she said to him, Mr. Frank, if Toltecs would open back up tomorrow, and the only way I could get there would be to crawl on my belly like a snake, I would do it. And so I was able, and I just thought, that's got to be the last time. So I really like that. One of my favorite things I wrote at the newspaper, it was just, I love reporting. I love going out and talking to people that I don't know, and they don't know me, and just seeing a different part of the world. And one day I was doing a profile on the ELL bus driver, who was super interesting. And I don't even think this moment made it into the story, but I just love these little surprise things that happen. This little girl gets on the bus, and she comes up to me, and she sits real close, and she's got like little pink plastic barrettes in her hair and little braids. And she says, "You kind of old, but I like you. You smell good, like Beyonce." This is one of my favorite moments, just being out in the field. If anybody's read Factory Man, of course, the Smith River trip ended disastrously with me practically in shock, and Pat Ross, who I was hoping would be here tonight. Oh, is she here? Where's Pat? Oh, there she is. Pat Ross is. My heart is Pat Ross. And so I go in, the river's really flowing, and I fall out, and Jim Franklin is way down, and he can't stop, and I said, "I'll meet you on the road." And well, first I hung onto his canoe, and then it was just so cold because the Smith River is what, like 40? It never changes, right? So it's 40, and I was like, I can't hold on. So I get over to the bank, I crawl up, it's really, really steep, there's poison ivy everywhere. And I think the road, because we had just passed Stanley Furniture, I think the road is going to be really close. And I'm like, oh my God. I was like in a field, and I'm clapping my hands because I thought there would be snakes. And I finally see like I was like, I don't understand the geography. I thought I'd be right on the road. And so I trudge over, and I'm like soaked. I've lost my fancy Ray-Ban sunglasses, which I'm never buying those again. And I go and I walk up to the back of the Dollar General. Pat, what's that road? I forget what road I was on. But the lady's coming out, and she's got the trash, and she's like, looks at like, oh. Like, she wants not to help me at all. Like, she thinks I'm probably a meth head. And so, and I have no phone, which wisely Jim Franklin said, don't bring your phone. And you know, you don't remember anybody's phone numbers anymore because they're all in your phone. So then I trudge over to the CVS, and I'm literally like, water all over the carpet, and they were nicer there, and I said, could I borrow your phone book to call Pat Ross? And Pat Ross came and got me.
Check the time here. Okay. So I got two more questions for y'all before we turn it over to a couple of audience questions. So I know y'all have a lot of irons in the fire. Can you tell us anything about your next books you're working on?
Sure. Speaking of things getting cut, so I have a book called Dope Sick. That's definitely the title. The working title is probably Doctors, Dealers, and the Drug Makers That Addicted America. It's about the heroin and opioid epidemic. I know. And it's going to come out next August. It wasn't supposed to be due till October 1st, which is tomorrow, right? 2 months ago, I got 10 days notice. They wanted it early because they wanted it to come out earlier next year because it's so timely and for marketing reasons. Mm-hmm. And so I had to turn it in before I even could read the whole thing over. Yeah, I mean, normally I read it out loud, I send it to friends, and so then the edits came back, 6 pages, single-spaced. That was my editorial letter. About all the questions, about a quarter of which I could answer. And then the manuscript appeared the next day on FedEx on my front porch. with these hard-to-read handwritten notes in light blue pencil.
At least you got all the pages back. Throw it away.
Well, there was lots of, but the little edits in the margins didn't answer the 6 pages of questions. So that's been painful, but we're good, and we're good. And that comes out next August, and it's been probably the hardest thing I've ever written. My mom, who has dementia and is 90, keeps asking me what I'm writing about. And I go, I'm writing a book about heroin. And every time she goes, well, don't do any. And I go, okay. And then she goes, you should write a love story. And I think I have written a love story to all these families and these first responders and the judges that are going through so much. Like, there's a lot of fatigue out there dealing with this issue.
And you know, I used to be your off-the-record source occasionally. We'll let that cat out of the bag, Never, I mean, just to sort of explain legal things. Just
definitely.
Technical things. My new book is called The Substitution Order, and it should be at Knopf in March or April. And do you always think the new one is the best one? I mean, do you think this is... I truly, every time I write one, this is the one. This is and I think this is truly the best thing I've done. I had to take 200 pages to Manhattan in June, and I took it, and everyone seemed to like it, and my editor, Gary, said, it's like many aspects grown up, which I thought was a really nice thing to say. The issue for me is, my reader is Dina, my wife, and she's always my first reader, and she's a good reader. She reads much more than I do, so she has a real sense of what's current, what will sell. She's a really good eye. And this novel, because when I sort of outlined this, the protagonist has some health issues. He had a heart attack. So I had a stroke. And I said, geez, I may as well get something out of this. Why not just, I won't have to go interview docs. I won't have to talk to everyone. I can just switch in stroke and write it. So I let Dina read the first draft. We were going somewhere on an airplane, and I handed it to her. It's probably about 90 or 100 pages. She got to about 20 pages, and she's read everything I've ever written. She's read the sex scenes, she's read the drinking scenes, the drugging scenes. It never bothers her, and she can figure out sometimes what some of them are. And she gets to about page 30. I cannot read it. I just can't do it. I can't do it. And I said, but it's not me. It's not me. But she said it was interesting that it was too close to home. She could not read it. So my English teacher from 10th grade, Ms. Belcher, will have her first read will be twice as hard this time. And I hope to have it in New York in, like I say, March, April, and then it will be out in a year from then. They keep yours in the pipeline about 9 months or a year. I've never really understood why. But,
I know.
Yeah. You deliver it and you're all excited. The first time I ever sent a manuscript in that was accepted, I said, be out tomorrow, I guess. And it's a year later. It's a year later, yeah. So, but I'm pretty sure that will be the title. That's the Substitution Order.
Okay.
At one point, the Substitution two-step was kicked around. Substitution Order, I like.
Was that a legal term?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I didn't mean to stop. It is.
Well, moving on. One last question from me for y'all. For anyone in the audience who would like to be a best-selling author one day, or anyone on this dais for that matter, what is the single best piece of writing advice you have ever received?
I don't know if it was advice, but when I was a young reporter in Savannah, Georgia, I sat next to this woman who was a couple years older than me, who had been doing it longer, and she had this great accent. I was from Ohio. I'd never really heard people quite talk like that until I hadn't been anywhere. I mean, really. And I showed up. I thought she would have her hair in curlers, like from Hee-Haw, because I had talked to her on the phone, and she was like so sophisticated. And anyways, I learned how to interview people from listening to her interview people on the phone. And whereas before I'd be sort of anal about it and have my questions written down, I still write a lot of my questions down, but she taught me that it's a conversation. And really, and then about writing, she taught me that, just be yourself. Don't try to be like anyone else. Just try to write the book, the story in your voice, because you're always going to do a better job when you do that. And then just my advice for living comes from John Bassett. I have so many pieces of advice for living. And one time he asked me to do something, I was too busy, and I said, I just have too many things to do, and I'm really stressed out. And he goes, well, as my father used to say, when you bit off more than you could chew, keep chewing. But when I called him, this is also another John Bassettism. When I called to tell him that Tom Hanks had bought the film rights for Factory Man, he was excited, and he said, just remember, the higher the monkey climbs up the tree, the more it shows its ass.
In terms of being a bestseller, the advice that Beth mentioned earlier is the best advice, and it's just right. People, do you get the emails at least 2 or 3 a month, and people will write you and say, I have this great story, and I will share it with you if you will write the book. It is the most incredible tale, but I need to meet with you, and I will tell you this story if you'll just write the book. I mean, the catch is, you hear people talk about inspiration. It's a job. It's seat time, and you do it every day. So, and of the three of us, and Beth and I are friends, of the three of us sitting on the stage, probably the most talented writer is Ben. However, the person who has the least discipline in terms of writing is also Ben. That's fair. That is, Ben will write a novel in a weekend, but can't put one together in 3 years. That's true. You do this thing, don't you? You write a novel in a weekend?
11 years in a row.
You disappear. He writes a novel in a weekend.
After the first year I tried to go without sleep for 3 days. After that, I've taken naps. I fell asleep and poured smelling salts all over the Mexican blanket I shrouded myself in, and it was a bad sin.
That's a true story. But Ben has prodigious talent. But all the talent in the world, it won't do you a bit of good in the world. I mean, unless you're sitting there at the computer every day, knocking it out, doing edits. And Truman Capote said, good writing's rewriting.
Well, y'all have time for a couple of audience questions?
Sure.
Well, anybody would like to ask a question? Please raise your hand. Yes, sir.
I just came here to speak for Coy Young. I taught Coy his senior year in high school in Bassett. He and I were the same age. We have continued that friendship for 65 years. And as soon as I heard about Beth's book, I got a copy and read it and loved it. And I walked in the side door of Coy's barber shop carrying the book, and I walked through the door and he said, I guess you're here to chew my ass out too.
Thank you very much, sir. Send our regards to Coy. Yes, you, sir.
Okay. Mrs. Macy, thank you for coming. I'm here to let you know that I lived this book.
True, bud? Factor man.
My grandmother was Mr. Bassett's maid, and
What was her name?
Gracie.
Gracie Wade?
And my grandfather was his chauffeur. So,
Pete Wade?
Pete Wade, that's my grandfather. So, a lot of things in the book I remember. And it brings tears to my eyes. There's so many memories. They were good people.
We're really good people.
They provided for so many families in Bassett. They helped me along as a child. I remember going to that big Victorian house that they lived in. And they treated me like I was their child. I remember when I went away to college, I would come home to work in the factories. And by the way, it made me want to get an education a lot. Believe me, it made me want to get an education. But some of the things that you had in this book, I remember my grandmother telling me about when Mr. Bassett left and went to Baliles. I remember her pleading with him not to go. Because her reason was so many people would be out of life.
Wow.
They
She
had
saw
no
it.
jobs,
Should've-
no money. So she pleaded for him to stay. So, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, bullshit. but I'll live in fact. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I felt like I knew Gracie Wade, and Pete a little bit, not quite as much, but John still talks about Gracie all the time, and Pat.
Yeah. My grandfather used to make 25 cents a day. He would give me 10 cents of it every day.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for saying that.
I think we've got time for one more question. Governor Baliles. Yes.
This has been a fascinating evening, and you've told us how you write. Tell us why you write.
So Corbett says money, and when Chris and I practiced law together, and I was getting rejection letters for 20 years, and I would use the copier, Corbett snidely said, "You have printed out enough copies on our copy machine for this to be a bestseller already." I write because this seems trite to say. I just like it. I get up and do, some people like playing golf, some people like collecting stamps, some people enjoy bowling. I like doing it. I've discovered it in college. I enjoy doing it, and I would have to like doing it, having accumulated 2 decades of rejection letters. I just enjoy it. Some people say, and I'm not going to have, someone profoundly moved, like Beth does something different than I do. No one's going to come here and say, I was profoundly moved and the legal limit or many aspects impacted me. We do different things. And I just like doing it. But Beth does something that is a little more, I think she has probably more important aspirations when she writes than I do.
I don't know about that. I went into journalism. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I went on full financial aid. They actually gave me money at the end, at the beginning, to buy my books with. That's how poor we were. Full federal need-based financial aid. And I picked journalism because I liked writing in high school. It was just like, I'll try that one. And I really liked it because you got to get deep one-on-one with people. And really, that's what I do now. It took me about 10 years to realize that the stories I wrote best were the stories about people like me, people who hadn't been listened to and whose stories hadn't been told. And probably my favorite story I ever wrote was for the Roanoke Times, about this young woman who was a librarian. She was like a page at the library. And no one in her family had gone to college. No one in her neighborhood had gone to college when I first met her. And she was number 1 in her class at William Fleming High School. Her name's Selena Sullivan. And I followed her. She was like a freshman when I met her. And they said, she's number 1 in her class. She's going to be something. And I would have my books that I would order from the other libraries delivered to the Gainsborough Library so that I would go there and I could check on her and kind of make a relationship with her. So I was there on the day, her senior year, when she found out she got into Harvard on a full ride. And some of the old men who would go to the newspaper every day, or they would go to the library every day, and there was this one man, he's actually in Truvine, he's a major source in Truvine, his name is Mr. A.L. Holland Sr. I had interviewed him before, but he would go there every day, and he would take the librarian, Carla Lewis, who was beautiful, roses from his garden. And when Selena found out she got into Harvard by email at 5 p.m., the whole library erupted because they had sort of raised her. And Mr. Holland put his newspaper down and he wept. And I love that when you can be this fly on the wall for a moment, when people who don't expect you, who underestimate you, and you turn that around. I love that kind of story. It's still my favorite kind of story. Even the best stories that are in my new book are examples of people doing unexpected things and voices you haven't heard from before. And so I feel really privileged to get to do that and to get paid to do that and to have people read it. It's now on a national scale. I never imagined I'd be writing books, and it's very. I just feel very grateful.
But before we leave, I have never, in 17 years of doing this, I have never hard sold my books. I'm going to hard sell my books tonight. The books that I have here are donated by my publisher. And I don't mean to undercut the governor, because I know you got pledge cards. But every book you buy, every dime will go to the Bookmobile, and then Dean and I will match it. So if you got $10 to spend, it'll become 20, and you're going to get a book. And if you got the million, like the governor, that you want to kick in, use a pledge card. But if you're thinking about giving 10, 15, 20, get yourself a book. It's fire season, even if you don't like it. It'll make it fall's going to be 45 degrees tonight. It's cheaper than a Duraflame that you get, a whole box of Duraflames you get at the store. So
Campfire.
Yeah, that's where you're headed. We'll give you a couple. So if you're thinking about buying a book or making a pledge, just please buy a book, and that money, every dime, will go to the Bookmobile, and then we'll match it. So it's sort of like doubling your money. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth and Martin, for giving us this wonderful opportunity to learn more about how you write and why you write. And Ben, many thanks for your wonderful questions, penetrating, intensively focused. You all were just terrific. We're grateful to Beth and Martin for telling their stories, in many ways our stories, to the rest of the world. And it seems to me that you have many more years of writing ahead of you. I hope that they were all $1 million sellers and more. And I think you can gather from what we've heard tonight how we can make up that $1 million that I talked about earlier. Speaking of books, as Martin has just mentioned, they do have books out in the outside this room available for purchase. And as Martin has said, the proceeds will go to the Bookmobile Fund, and Martin and Dina will match it. What I would also add is that if you don't have a signed copy of one of their books already, this is a perfect opportunity because they will go outside and be available to sign the books that you buy, even if we're here for another couple of hours. When they get up to go to their book signing tables from Barnes & Noble, booksellers, I ask the audience just to remain for a moment for a surprise announcement. I've learned from long experience that you can't have a charity event without prizes. So while we give our authors an opportunity to go to their tables, let me ask Rick Ward to return to the stage and announce some very nice door prizes. And again, let me ask you all to thank our guest authors.